friends, ever wonder what kind of sugar is in your Greek yogurt? So I bought here 2 Greek yogurts. So they're both from Chobani. This one I got for 50% off. This one has just 8 grams of carb and 0 added sugar. Literally it says 0 added sugar. And this one has, let's see, 17 grams of carbs. There's no fiber, but it has 11 grams of added sugar. Total sugars is 16 grams in this white container, and this one has a total sugar of 7 grams. So why the difference? And seriously, how can this be mango flavored and have 0 added sugar? Yogurt is a billion-dollar industry. So I'm going to tell you a story about how some people got really mad at Chobani, specifically the Chobani Zero Sugar sold at Costco for false advertisement. Now, if you actually read the label outside the nutrition facts for Chobani Zero Sugar yogurt, it says it contains allulose. So their question was, isn't allulose a sugar? So this confused people so much that they took a class action lawsuit against Chobani for deceptive labeling. Did they have a case? Now, I find this suit so fascinating because it uncovered a lot of what people didn't realize, that reading food labels for sugar content is not so simple. So by the end of today's video, I'm going to share with you what happened in the lawsuit, but more importantly, you're going to be able to understand how to read food labels better, which sugars to avoid in your yogurt, why the FDA makes labeling so confusing, and how allulose affects your blood sugar, your insulin, and metabolism. And even if you don't eat yogurt, you should really pay attention because I suspect allulose is going to be in many processed foods going forward. And you'll be really surprised at how much allulose is already in the foods that you're eating. So the story begins in 2023, where Jason and Abigail Franco, they went shopping at Costco in Illinois.
We have 2 options for the best Bobby-approved yogurts at Costco.
And they bought a case of Chobani Zero Sugar yogurt because they believed it was sugar-free. And this is the image that they submitted in court. It literally says 0 sugar everywhere. And the label reads, we did it. We took the sugar out of milk and we sweetened it with only natural sugar alternatives. And this is one-of-a-kind product that has 0 sugar, lots of protein, no lactose, and just 60 calories. But then the Frankos read the ingredients and saw allulose. Apparently, it was 4 grams per serving. So what's allulose? Allulose is a chemical monosaccharide, a simple sugar like glucose and fructose. Common table sugar is sucrose. That's a disaccharide, another type of sugar. Now, lactose, usually in dairy, is a disaccharide. And then there's maltose. So technically speaking, sugars are defined as a sum of all free mono and disaccharides. And this includes glucose, fructose, allulose, sucrose, lactose, maltose. So the FDA actually defines all sugars from monosaccharides and disaccharides, including galactose and allulose, as sugars. And normally, any of these sugars need to be in the nutrition fact labels. This is a federal law since 2016. However, there was a citizens petition asking the FDA to make an exception for allulose. And I'll tell you who actually filed the petition and what the FDA decided later. And by the way, if you find values in my videos, would you mind checking if you're subscribed? And if you are not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, like button, and share button, because it does change how many people get to watch my videos. I appreciate your partnership in helping to change the world. I'm sure by now you have a fructose radar on because high fructose corn syrup, that's bad for your health. And if you're health conscious, you're probably also trying to avoid artificial stuff like artificial sweeteners such as aspartame, which was recently deemed to be potentially carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. So if your yogurt has aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, organic cane sugar, sucrose, agave, maple syrup, honey, fruit juice concentrate, brown rice syrup, tapioca syrup, sweetened fruit preparations, I think you get the gist. You may want to rethink about eating that yogurt, even if it's plant-based. Sweeteners, they can all raise your blood sugars along with your visceral fat, especially if you're eating full-fat yogurts. because they both raise your insulin and contribute to insulin resistant and weight gain and all the metabolic consequences of being insulin resistant. And I know that we all want to be healthy. That's why people are eating Greek yogurt. So I'm actually not going to address whether eating yogurt is healthy or not in this episode. That's going to be a future episode. But added sugars, that's an important ingredient to address, especially when you're eating it in excess multiple times throughout the day, because nobody is just eating one container of sugar, right? One yogurt. We're eating it in multiple foods throughout the day. And our society is addicted to sugar. It's one of the last tastes that leaves your taste buds as you grow older. So imagine the excitement of finding a sugar that's all natural, that doesn't contribute to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. Would you get excited and eat that? That is the hope that people have put in allulose. Now, allulose is actually a relatively modern invention. Technically, it was first isolated from molasses in the 1940s, but nobody thought it would have any value because they couldn't mass produce it until a Japanese professor named Is Allulose was able to find an enzyme that turned fructose into allulose efficiently to mass produce it. In fact, he developed the Is Allulose strategy, which is a chemical roadmap of converting common sugars into rare sugars like allulose. Now, this has allowed the food industry, like food ingredient manufacturers, to scale and mass produce these ingredients like allulose that are sugar substitutes with 0 or low calories. However, allulose is a natural ingredient found in fruits like raisins and figs and jackfruit, even wheat, brown sugar, molasses, maple syrup. But there's not a lot of it. For example, for 100 grams of maple syrup, there may be like 0.058% of allulose by weight. Now, allulose is on the FDA's generally recognized as safe list, and we'll kind of get to what that means or doesn't mean later. Now, you would think that before they took Chobani to court that they would have done their due diligence and homework. At least their lawyers should have done that, to take a deep dive into labeling rules about allulose, which, by the way, is a $200 million global market. Now, allulose is super fascinating because at first glance, it looks exactly like fructose with the same atoms and structure, except for one little turn. It is, in fact, the epimer of glucose. An epimer is a molecule that has the same atoms and the same overall structure as another molecule, but it just differs in one tiny direction in one chemical group at one carbon. So between fructose and allulose, the only difference is at carbon 3. The OH group points one way in fructose and the opposite way in allulose. And in chemistry, if you just change the direction of your atom, you change how it interacts with the world. It's like, trying to stuff a sleeping bag in its original case. I always struggle with that, even though it's literally the same sleeping bag that I just took out and used for one night. So that tiny change in allulose makes your body handle allulose very differently from fructose. It just so happens, though, allulose tastes just as sweet on your tongue as fructose without the metabolic side effects of high glucose, insulin. It can't be used for de novo lipogenesis, and it doesn't inhibit fatty acid oxidation, unlike fructose, which means it doesn't cause fatty liver or contribute to obesity, right? We'll see. I'll give you my thoughts on that later. But keep in mind, it is not a no-calorie food, folks, although it is low-calorie. 70% is absorbed in the small intestine, and most of that is excreted in the urine without significant metabolism. The other 30% passes through your large intestine unfermented. So that seems like that could be good. Now, let's go back to the class action lawsuit. It was actually brought up by 4 people besides Jason and Abigail, Misty, Lacey, and John Baker. I actually had a math teacher named John Baker. It's probably a really common name. Anyway, their argument was that allulose is a sugar and Chobani put 4 grams of it per serving, but labeled their product sugar-free, and they thought that was wrong and misleading. So they felt kind of tricked and betrayed and believed that Chobani was deceptively labeling yogurt so that they could boost their sales so that they can go IPO. And apparently Chobani filed an IPO on the NASDAQ in November 2021, but then they withdrew it in September 2022. So currently Chobani is still a privately owned company. Now, the plaintiffs believe that they had a case because deceptive labeling violates federal laws and regulations regarding food labels. You shouldn't sell somebody something that's not on the label, right? And so here's why the FDA rules are so confusing. There's actually two sets of labeling rules. There's a nutrition facts in the box, which totals sugars, added sugars, protein, fat, calories. Then there are labeling rules outside of the nutrition box, which include zero sugar, high protein, low fat, no added sugar, claims on the front or the side of the package that's not in the little box. Now, FDA treats these as two separate parts of the label. So the same words can follow different rules depending on where they appear, in the box or outside the box. So inside the nutrition facts box, if total sugar is 0 grams, this follows the nutrition fact regulations. On the front of the container, if it says 0 sugar, that would follow a labeling regulations. And even though both refer to sugar, they're governed by different FDA rules. Now, if the statement is repeated outside the nutrition facts box, it no longer follows the nutrition facts rules. It's following the labeling rules instead. For example, the nutrition facts, total sugar is 0 gram. On the front label, you can say 0 sugar. The front claim is judged under the FDA's labeling regulations, not the nutrition facts regulations.
If you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
So what does total sugars even mean? So the regulation says total sugars is a sum of all the free monosaccharides and disaccharides. So that includes sugars like glucose, fructose, lactose, sucrose. So under the ordinary definition, allulose would seem to be missing on their nutrition facts label because it is a monosaccharide. However, in 2015, Tate and Lyle filed a citizens petition asking the FDA to allow allulose to be excluded from the declared total sugars and added sugars on the nutrition facts label because it behaves metabolically different from conventional sugars. So who's Tate and Lyle? Now, these are not a couple of people making sweetener somewhere in middle America. Tate and Lyle, PLC, is a large British food ingredient company that is publicly traded on the London Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol TATE. Now, the company built its name through sugar refinery and has historically been one of the major forces in this sugar industry. However, it sold its European sugar refining business in 2010, and now it focuses primarily on specialty ingredients used by food manufacturers. So in June of 2026, the American ingredient company Ingredion agreed to acquire Tate & Lyle in a deal valued at about $3.6 billion, although that acquisition has not been completed yet. Now, Ingredion is a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol INGR. So both companies supply food manufacturers with refined ingredients such as starches and fibers and stabilizers and texturers and sweeteners. And this includes commercial forms of allulose. So in April of 2019, the FDA issued a draft guidance announcing that it intended to exercise enforcement discretion by allowing allulose to remain in the total carbohydrate but not be counted in the total sugars and not be counted in the added sugars. The FDA also proposed allowing allulose to be calculated as 0.4 kilocalories per gram instead of 4 kilocalories per gram. And in October 2020, the FDA issued its final guidance on allulose and essentially agreed that allulose was not metabolically the same as other simple sugars like glucose and fructose. It must be included in the total carbohydrate, but it does not need to be included in the declared total sugars and does not need to be included in the declared added sugars and should be counted as 0.4 kilocalories per gram for calories. Here's a 12-page summary if you're interested in reading up about it. So the plaintiff, they didn't file their suit until 2023 against Chobani Zero Sugar Greek Yogurt, which, by the way, has been on the market since 2021, long after the FDA's rules on allulose labeling. So I think the plaintiff's legal team just kind of missed this 12-page summary. And the judge concluded that Chobani's label followed the FDA's rules, even though allulose is chemically a monosaccharide. The court didn't decide whether allulose is a sugar or not. It just recognized that the FDA had created special labeling treatment for allulose. So, should you eat it? Well, I don't think small amounts are harmful at all because they are naturally found in common foods and fruits. But the thing is, there's no official tolerable upper level of intake that is established by the FDA for allulose or even the European Food Society. And in life, everything that is good for you is going to be bad if you overdo it, even water. So 4 grams of allulose in a cup of yogurt is probably safe. And studies have found that humans can probably tolerate 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight, which means that a normal 70 kilogram adult, they can eat 28 grams in one setting. Now, if you're eating 28 grams in one setting, you're eating the wrong food, folks. I mean, you're eating 7 cups of yogurt, or are you eating like a bunch of food that's highly processed? So we're actually, debating about sugar substitutes and whether it's junky or not. And allulose just may be an excuse for you to eat more junk because all the other ingredients in that food is probably going to be pretty junky for you and maybe even worse than allulose. And when you exceed your allulose threshold, you may have diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, gas, and nausea. And this was actually all submitted to the FDA by Tate and Lyle. Isn't that interesting? However, you're probably already eating allulose. Sponge cake, corn snacks, rice cracker, cookies, brown sugar, fried dough, caramel sauce, cakes, meat sauce, Worcester sauce. Look at that table 9. This is where manufacturers are actually planning to use allulose, with the top 3 being cereal bars, dried cranberries, and protein bars. Now, I find that the meat and poultry, like deli meats and jerky, to be fascinating. This list is basically all processed foods. And if this is your diet, I highly recommend you reconsider your definition of what a healthy food is. Now, on page 75 to 82, if you're interested, they have the proposed amount based on age. And many people think that because allulose is not significantly metabolized for energy, that it's a safe product with no limit. I have news for you folks. The body just is not an energy machine. We got all different kinds of pathway, all different tissues to remodel, from your liver to your kidneys to your heart, your blood vessels, your immune system, your brain. It's a big mistake to only think of metabolism as cranking out energy or storing energy. Now, everybody's excited because it seems like animals who eat allulose in the long term have less intra-abdominal fat and they have lower body weight. But animals don't live as long as people. Mice and rats, they live like less than 2 years. So does that mean you can go all out and eat a bunch of it? Yeah, I'd be really careful about that because that's not how life works. When people eat large amounts of anything, including water, we're going to see more side effects. Remember, when you eat allulose in nature, you're eating it packaged in fiber, polyphenols, wrapped in hydration. That's not happening when you're eating added allulose to your, ham or your cake. Now, I don't think a little bit is harmful. Just a little bit, like sucrose or fructose, that's not harmful either. It's actually in our natural food, right? But when you're eating allulose in tons of snacks and cookies and cakes and, everything else that you're eating, you're adding it up quite quickly, which is probably not the healthiest thing to do. And I mentioned when you're eating ingredients, you should be eating prebiotics with polyphenols and anthocyanins and antioxidants. So when you eat a cake, you're not getting any of that. And that's another reason why cakes are more harmful. If you read on page 28 of this document that I found, which is 149 pages, you'll notice that the liver and kidneys of the rats fed allulose weighed significantly more than the ones that didn't eat it. And they also had higher red blood cells and white blood cell counts, even though they said it wasn't statistically significant. Now, some of the rats were eating like 30 to 40% of their diet in allulose. Those critters, they didn't survive. That's why you don't want to overeat anything, including allulose. But, this film is ultimately about Greek yogurt, and people eat Greek yogurt for protein, right? Let's face it. So is your protein healthy? Well, let's find out in part 2.